Today on RoxomTV News, Greenland takes center stage in Davos as President Trump says he won't use force to take the Arctic island and says the crypto bill will be signed soon. All that and more right now on today's show. Let's get into it. Happy Wednesday and welcome back to another edition of RoxomTV News. I'm your host, Hank Hudson. Our top story of the hour, U.S. President Donald Trump opened his one-hour speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos with a subject that has become impossible for Europe to ignore: Greenland. He introduced it lightly, asking the audience whether they wanted him to say a few words on the island, drawing laughter before quickly turning serious. Trump said he has no plans to use force to take Greenland and insisted that U.S. control of the territory would not be a threat to NATO, though he issued a warning to the bloc if they did not comply. Here's more on what he had to say.
So we want a piece of ice for world protection, and they won't give it. We've never asked for anything else, and we could have kept that piece of land, and we didn't. So they have a choice. You can say yes, and we will be very appreciative, or you can say no, and we will remember.
Now, Trump also repeated one of his most controversial claims, that Denmark is too weak to protect Greenland on its own, and argued that only the United States can fully secure the Arctic island. What once sounded like a rhetorical sideshow has now hardened into a full-blown transatlantic dispute, and Davos has become the stage where that conflict is playing out in public. Now, Trump doubled down on threats to impose tariffs on European countries that resist U.S. efforts to acquire Greenland, even as he insists the broader U.S.-EU trade relationship will survive intact. Now, European leaders are far less convinced. As Trump arrived in Davos, a message projected into the sky reading, "No kings," a gesture widely interpreted as a pointed response to his rhetoric. Let's take a look.
Can you? Is it nice? Because it's very...
Now, behind the symbolism, positions on both sides of the Atlantic have continued to harden. European officials say the European Union is now fully prepared to retaliate if the United States follows through on its tariff threats. Brussels is openly discussing countermeasures and trade defense tools, signaling that this is no longer being treated as a bluff. French President Emmanuel Macron warned that Europe must not give in to economic pressure, arguing that backing down would invite further coercion in the future. Here's how he framed it.
We do believe that we need more growth, we need more stability in this world. But we do prefer respect to bullies, we do prefer science to plotism, and we do prefer rule of law to brutality.
Now, Germany echoed that message, saying questions of sovereignty and territorial integrity are not negotiable. At the same time, U.S. officials have pushed back against European calls, particularly from France, for NATO military drills in Greenland, suggesting Washington wants to prevent the dispute from escalating into a formal alliance-wide security confrontation. Now, Trump has continued to frame the situation as part of a larger strategic and economic agenda rather than an outright rupture. He has repeatedly suggested that the U.S. control of Greenland would ultimately benefit all parties involved and that opposition will fade over time. Let's take a look at how he described it.
How far are you willing to go to acquire Greenland?
You'll find out.
If a consequence of your determination to take control of Greenland is the ultimate breakup of the NATO alliance, is that a price you're willing to pay?
You mean the breakup of it's very interesting.
The NATO alliance.
So I think something's going to happen that's going to be very good for everybody. Nobody's done more for NATO than I have, as I said before, in every way. Getting them to go up to 5% of GDP was something that nobody thought was possible, and pay. At 2%, they weren't paying. At 5%, they are paying. And they're buying a lot of things from us, and they're giving them, I guess, to Ukraine. That's up to them, but they're giving them to whoever they're giving them to, but they're buying a lot. I think that we will work something out where NATO is going to be very happy. and where we're going to be very happy.
Still, Trump's actions have added fuel to the fire. He has released private messages from Macron, shared provocative material online, and repeatedly said there is no going back on Greenland, language that has left European allies skeptical that this is simply a negotiating tactic. Now, with global political and business leaders gathered in Davos to focus on growth, inflation, and stability, Greenland has instead become a symbol of a deeper transatlantic strain, one that mixes Arctic security, trade leverage, and political brinksmanship into a single, highly visible confrontation. Now, the rhetoric took a more serious turn when Greenland's prime minister addressed the public directly. Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen warned citizens to begin preparing for the possibility of a military invasion, emphasizing that while such a scenario remains unlikely, it cannot be ruled out given the mounting pressure surrounding the island. Speaking in Nuuk, Nielsen announced the creation of a national task force and new civil defense guidelines, including recommendations that households store at least 5 days' worth of food in case of disruptions. Now, Greenland's leadership stressed that the move is precautionary rather than alarmist, but acknowledged that the security environment has deteriorated in recent weeks. Denmark has responded by deploying additional troops to Greenland and expanding Arctic defense drills under Operation Arctic Endurance, potentially shifting exercises to a year-round footing. Now, several NATO allies have also sent officers to the island, underscoring Europe's concern that rhetoric could eventually translate into coercive action. Trump has added to that unease by posting AI-generated images of himself planting a U.S. flag on Greenland and threatening tariffs against NATO countries that bolster the island's defenses. Greenland, which is home to roughly 57,000 people, governs most domestic affairs but remains part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Officials there have reiterated that the island's future is not open to negotiation under pressure. And security remains at the center of Trump's argument, but Greenland is already deeply embedded in global military landscapes. You see, the United States operates a base in northwest Greenland under a decades-old agreement with Denmark. The installation plays a key role in missile warning, space surveillance, and polar tracking as part of the broader NORAD early warning system shared with Canada. Russia maintains the largest military footprint in the Arctic, as Moscow has reopened or expanded dozens of bases along its northern coast, deployed radar and air defense systems, and positioned nuclear-capable submarines tied to its northern fleet. NATO allies have responded by reinforcing their own presence. The U.S., Canada, and European partners are upgrading radar coverage, conducting joint exercises, and investing in cold weather forces and infrastructure. Nordic countries have expanded air and naval patrols across the high north. Greenlandic and Danish leaders argue this existing posture undercuts Trump's claim that a U.S. takeover is necessary for security. And the dispute has also exposed uncomfortable divisions inside Europe over how far the bloc should go in pushing back. France has taken the most forceful stance, arguing that backing down would invite future pressure not only over Greenland, but over sovereignty more broadly. Germany has favored de-escalation, reflecting concern over economic fallout if tariffs are imposed, particularly for export-driven industries. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has criticized tariff threats as being wrong, while stopping short of threatening retaliation, instead emphasizing dialogue and NATO cooperation. Now, smaller EU states worry that confrontation could weaken security ties with Washington at a time of heightened global instability, while southern members remain focused on avoiding economic blowback. Diplomats say the Greenland dispute has become a real test of European cohesion, and less about Greenland itself and more about whether the bloc can reconcile competing priorities when confronted by United States pressure. Now, even in Davos, optics have played a role here. French President Emmanuel Macron appeared wearing blue-tinted aviator sunglasses indoors, triggering online speculation that the look carried symbolic meaning. The explanation, though, was far simpler. Macron has been dealing with a minor eye condition caused by broken blood vessels, and the sunglasses are worn for medical reasons. Still, social media did what it does best, and comparisons quickly followed. Markets, for now, are reacting cautiously rather than dramatically. European equities slipped modestly, led by export-exposed sectors, while U.S. stocks steadied after early volatility. Strategists say investors are treating tariff threats as credible but not yet actionable. Gold, silver, and copper are trending near record highs, benefiting from the safe haven demand and a weaker dollar, while bond markets remain calm. Talk of a Sell America trade has resurfaced in Europe, but remains more in conversation than capital flight. For now, markets appear willing to look through the dispute as long as it says rhetorical, and formal tariffs or retaliation would likely force a reassessment. Now, I'm going to give you my take on this. So this is kind of the simplest way to think about this. This isn't really about Greenland itself. It's about whether trade pressure is now a standard tool for settling disputes that have nothing to do with trade, and whether anyone is willing to push back when it's used that way. President Trump is betting that the pressure works, that allies will protest, issue statements, threaten retaliation, and then quietly look for a compromise. Europe is betting that if it doesn't draw a line here, it will face the same tactic again, somewhere else, under different circumstances. And for Greenland, well, Greenland is caught in the middle of all this, watching two power centers argue about leverage and credibility while asking ordinary people to quietly prepare for disruptions just in case. Markets are watching how this ends, and allies are watching, because whatever happens here won't stay confined to Greenland. It will shape how future disputes are handled, not just between the US and Europe, but across the global system. And that's why this moment matters more than it might first appear. All right, joining me on the show this morning, the man who can connect the dots like no one else, Nolan Bowerly. Nolan, happy Wednesday. How are you? Always a pleasure having you on the show.
I love life. I'm excited about the future of humanity and the humans in Greenland. I'm excited for their future as well. I think it's great.
Yeah. So Trump spoke at Davos. He said no military force is going to be used. What's your initial beat on this, Nolan?
Well, I mean, I took it differently when I saw the mountaintop with the fiery no kings. I thought that was in support of Trump. Denmark has a king. I thought they said no kings. Yeah. But I guess not.
A little confusing.
Yeah. Of course, we've seen the No Kings protests in America. We know that's a funded protest, just like I imagine they paid professionals to go to the top of the mountain to put that fiery sign into it. So it's all propaganda. It's all persuasion. And that's really what Trump went there and did. He did his thing. He's a persuader. So he goes in front of that audience and he begins his Trump theater shtick, which is always a lot of fun, right? But what I see from this story anyway, and what I think is going to happen, and when I look at the numbers, even I saw yesterday, a poll says about 70% of Greenlanders are now for the money. It has nothing to do with America. They're for the rumored checks that are coming out. They're for the rumored amount of money. I saw yesterday Jesse Waters on Fox making a similar point. What I think happened here, and why I continue to predict that Greenland is going to be a part of the United States this year, is because it looks like Trump has decided. It's not that he's wanting this. He's not saying it would be great. It looks like he's made a decision. He's firm on it. And you can even go further. Just before he left to Greenland on his 1-year anniversary of his inauguration, he did an impromptu press conference yesterday with Caroline Leavitt in the White House press briefing room. And there he discussed many things, but one of the things that came up was actually NATO membership. And part of NATO membership requires the NATO members themselves to have a First Amendment type freedom of speech clause. And that's not what they have in England right now. They've arrested, I think, 15,000 people for mean tweets. Germany's in the same order of arrests. France is there. So there's no way NATO makes it through this. The whole military thing was already clown world. I mean, there is no possible military. It would be like saying, I don't like thinking in analogies, but it would be like saying, are you going to use a rocket launcher to pitch a baseball? You can't really play the game with a rocket launcher. Like there's no one to play against. Yeah. There's no one who's showing up for the American military to be used. They have diesel submarines. They don't have, I heard Mark Carney's speech yesterday said, we agree Article 5, Denmark. What are they going to do? Are they going to send their navies and air force 5,000 miles against the greatest navy the world has ever seen and the greatest air force the world? It's never going to happen. Trump has made a decision. I don't think he cares what the cost is for European anger, trade wars, whatever. You saw Howard Lutnick there doing the same thing yesterday. He got into a debate with his exact same counterpart, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK. That's similar to the Treasury Secretary and Commerce Secretary, sort of, in the UK system. And she came out, said England, blah, blah, blah. He said, you don't even make batteries. Like, how can you be talking about net zero? You don't have the cards, you don't have the tech. And when I saw Trump go over there to persuade at Davos, he's saying exactly that. It doesn't matter what Europe wants. We're not in the world of speeches anymore. We're not in the world of trying to make an eloquent sentence. We're in the world of persuasion. We're in the world of bodies actually moving. Trump is only just starting to negotiate. And I think what he's going to offer the King of Denmark and the Kingdom of Denmark and the people of Denmark and the people of Greenland is going to be too much to resist, and that will solve all of this problem. Greenland is going to the United States.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm very. This situation just keeps getting more and more interesting with each given day. You know, we've heard Trump kind of threaten levying tariffs on European countries that aren't in favor of this, but we're also seeing European countries talk more openly about potential retaliation, not just statements of concern. So, my question for you, Nolan, is from your perspective, how realistic is it that this could turn into an actual trade confrontation rather than remaining rhetorical pressure like we're kind of seeing now? Do you think that's a real possibility?
If the EU was able to stay consistent against the United States, maybe you could have a real trade war. But Trump is going to begin to do bilateral, I should say, trade deals with individual countries. He's already working around the EU architecture. The Europe and the EU are not the same thing. So, for example, he mentioned the deal he gave Switzerland, and he said, I probably could have got more, but I like Switzerland. I wanted to do well, so I gave Switzerland whatever deal. What we saw from, for example, Italy, they're not signing up for any of this stuff. I think the Italian defense minister said it best. Germany sends 13 soldiers, France says 13 soldiers, and England sends 13 soldiers. He's like, it's the beginning of a joke. 13, what happens when 13 German soldiers and English walk into Greenland? It's a joke. It's like the beginning of a joke. So individually, European countries are not going to be able to create a unified enough front. And because each of their economies is so specialized, I mean, I heard Trump yesterday boarding a plane said, one tariff on champagnes and wines, and the French will do whatever we tell them. And that's the case. I mean, they can say European trade, but they can't really muster that type of coordination. They don't have the same architecture. Right. Van der Leyen can't do it. Maybe Germany, maybe France can do their individual trade wars, but they wouldn't last very long. They don't make batteries, as Howard Lutnick says. And then the other countries, the Spains, the Italys, the Eastern European countries, they're signing up for Trump's Board of Peace. They're going around to these new forms of multilateral power that he's creating that aren't the UN, because don't forget, in that same speech, he said, the UN should really be the group out there doing peace. Why am I doing it? I'm the American president. I'm supposed to be looking after American people. I use the trade stuff and sanctions and all that in order to get peace, but that's not really what it's designed for, but it worked out, and who cares? I did it. It needed to be done. So Trump is creating this other architecture now where Russia is already involved, where China is already involved. The funniest thing about all of this is that when you see, there was a train accident yesterday in Spain, and right away, the media who got it completely wrong said Russia, like their brains are still on Russia, and it had nothing to do with Russia in the end. But what you're going to see is because they had to placate China so much yesterday, because you heard so much from Mark Carney, because you heard right there from Macron in his shades, my future's so bright, I got to wear shades speech that he gave. He's only got a few months left in office saying, China, if we can't deal with America, we're going to have to deal with China. Right. So they are going to have to deal with China now. And it's, first of all, hilarious that you're going to replace America with China. And, America's obviously not going to let that happen. And so when you see them going back on these reflexes, you realize that Trump has them kind of right where he wants them. And they're going to have to capitulate eventually. And they don't have the cards.
Yeah, he's really art of the dealing them right now. And you mentioned we have these military forces, that this kind of hodgepodge, 13 from Germany, France, whatever, coming to Greenland. But as we know, Greenland is already heavily militarized with US, NATO, and Russian assets in the Arctic, which kind of undercuts the argument we've heard from Trump that a takeover is about security alone. How does the existing military reality complicate Trump's justification here? And at this point, does it even matter? Why? he's choosing
No,
to do this?
I think Trump is trying to use sort of laundry list persuasion because he can't really articulate the real reason why he wants it. I'm not a mind reader. I don't know what's going on in Trump's mind.
Yeah.
But indeed, if it was just minerals, they could have that deal. If it was just military, they already have that deal. Again, I go back to this idea that Trump is really trying to repaint the map. Remember what Trump did a year ago on his first day? It became the Gulf of America, not the Gulf of Mexico. He is focused singularly on growing and changing the map. Now, the medium is the message. You know, that's a famous Canadian media analyst named Marshall McLuhan came up with that slogan, right? The medium is the message. How you're communicating these things is the message. That's why he says ownership alone. It is about the map. It's about the color of the map. It's about all of those things. Now, that might seem superficial, but the actual map of the world is an important thing because America, just go back to a few months ago or a year ago now when Joe Biden was president, and, you know, it didn't really look like it had the legs of an empire that's going to exist for another cycle. It looked like everyone, the Ray Dalios, everyone was saying, oh, China's turn. This is a normal up and down of an empire. This is the way it has always worked. America was up, but now it's down, and China's waiting in the wings. That was a narrative that everybody at the WEF was talking about last year, and everyone at all these conferences have been talking about for years. So Trump is out there trying to, and that's why you always hear in his speech, one of his stock lines right now is it's the hottest country in the world. America's we went from nothing. We were down and out. We were a failed nation, and now we're the hottest country in the world. That's what this is all about. It's momentum. It's the direction of the country. The medium is the message. The maps are the message. It doesn't seem like important to a lot of people, but it reminds me, you know, it kind of reminds me, again, I don't like thinking in analogies, but it's an analogy that works and does sort of explain what I think Trump is seeing. Go back to the beginning of the Macintosh computer when Steve Jobs got his hands on the design process. And at one of the last minutes in the iteration of the original 1984 Mac, you had people come out and say, you know, how many fonts do people need? And he was insistent. He was delaying the production of the Microsoft, the original Office suite, saying, no, we need infinite fonts. And the people were saying, what are you talking about? Fonts? Like, you need 4, big, small, New York Times. What do you mean? And Steve Jobs was one of the only people who understood that the original application of the computer was going to be printing invitations, take my number, corkboard stuff at the grocery store. He was going to be bringing computers into people's real lives. Therefore, the printer was going to have a huge role. And if the printer is going to have a huge role, this little weird thing that no one cares about, font, was going to become everything. And of course, Steve Jobs was right. It was the original application of the first desktop. I mean, there were computers that corporations used, but the first sort of normal use of a computer was this weird font thing from Word and the printing and all of that stuff. And only Steve Jobs sort of saw that. And that is one of those medium is the message lessons. His signal was that all of these fonts were going to be important. No one believed him. Trump is saying here the map itself is what's important. The story that the map tells is what's important. The map, whenever you look at a map from before the Soviet Union fell, you say, whoa, look at how weird the world, look how big Soviet Union was, look at how different everything was.
Yeah.
So switching this map is a huge cognitive sign. It's a huge worldview change. So don't discount just the map. It's why his first action was Gulf of America, and this is in line with that, and that's why it's being done. All these other arguments, exactly like I think you're suspicious of, the commercial one and the security one, it's because it's so hard to explain what I just explained. He can't really go out and do that.
Yeah.
You know, he's out there pumping up WrestleMania, whatever. He's not going to start telling you about maps and Marshall McLuhan and all this stuff, right?
Yeah, no, that's a super interesting analogy. I appreciate you sharing that with us. And, you know, you mentioned about like worldview, like changing worldview. And this kind of goes into this story too in a different way. Because if we zoom out, right, and we look how this is playing out, what do you think this dispute is telling us about how trade pressure is being used in geopolitical negotiations right now, and how that might reshape how allies deal with each other going forward? Because I'm not as studied as you, but I can't remember a time that we've seen something quite like this on the world stage. It seems a little
it's even crazier,
unique, right?
It's even crazier. I'll even take it in a different angle. Yesterday, Trump was
Yeah.
signaling, again, you've heard of the 2000 US trash token dividend for tariffs that he's going to give individual Americans. That's using this trade weapon unconstitutionally. He has no right to go around Congress to do this. That's not real. But he's going to do it anyway. It's the same way he's weaponizing the person this way. He's creating this relationship with people around the issue of tariffs. You know, you heard today that perhaps Powell is going to go and listen in on the Supreme Court because they're going to be judging whether or not Trump's tariff power is constitutional or not. The one he's enacted this time, he's got other routes to it, but this is the one he wants. So apparently Powell's going there. Bessent warned him, this is, if you're trying to stay out of politics, this is the last thing you should be doing. You shouldn't be going to watch the Supreme Court. Trump is saying he's going to go watch it, which is also of the same vein. Probably shouldn't be there. But that's not the world we're in. We're in the world of Trump changing these things. So yes, everything you're saying about tariffs is 100% part of economic war. World War III, the frame that I continue to use for World War III is that it is a psychological and economic war. The battlefronts are psychological and economic. And Trump is pulling both of those levers with this tariff question. He's manipulating the psychology of other countries, getting them to act the way he wants, getting them to act in his own interest. He's using the art of the deal stuff. And of course, the threat of tariffs and the threat of loss of access to the American market is a nuclear bomb when it comes to these negotiations. So he's definitely getting what he wants out of all of these negotiations. And it looks like he's going to continue to win them. The strategy works for him
Yeah, it
and
certainly
America.
seems. Yeah, Trump really knows seems to know what levers to pull right now. And, you know, this Greenland talk, of course, wasn't the only thing we heard Trump speak about at Davos, as he also mentioned signing a crypto bill soon, which brings us to our top Bitcoin story of the hour. So, guys, roll the stinger. Nolan and I are going to get into it. All right, so President Donald Trump delivered fresh signals to global markets today while speaking in Davos, saying he hopes to sign a crypto bill soon. The comment, brief but pointed, landed in front of a room packed with heads of state, central bankers, and global CEOs. Trump said he wants to ensure America remains the crypto capital of the world, adding that Congress is working really hard on crypto market structure legislation, Bitcoin, all of them. Now, the remarks signal that digital asset policy is no longer a fringe issue, but a priority moving through the final stages of the legislative process. Let's take a look.
To unleash innovation in savings and financing, I'm also working to ensure America remains the crypto capital of the world. And to that end, last year I signed the landmark Genius Act into law. Now Congress is working very hard on crypto market structure legislation, Bitcoin, all of them, which I hope to sign very soon, unlocking new pathways for Americans to reach financial freedom. And I did it for two reasons. Number one, I thought it was politically good, and it was. I got tremendous political support. But more importantly, China wanted that market too. It's just like they want the AI. And we've got that market, I think, pretty well locked up. If I didn't do it, Biden was totally against it until before the election, when they realized that, there were millions of people voting against him over crypto. And all of a sudden, they loved it very much, but it was too late. They blew it. But it is politically popular, but it's much more importantly, we have to make it so that China doesn't get the hold of it. And once they have that hold, we're not going to be able to get it back.
Now, for President Trump to frame this legislation as something that could unlock new paths for Americans to reach financial freedom is a high signal moment. It shows that the White House is openly recognizing Bitcoin and crypto as having a potential role in reshaping money, markets, and individual sovereignty. This comes after crypto czar David Sachs said in Davos, banks are expected to enter crypto markets once U.S. market structure legislation is finalized. Sachs framed the delay as regulatory, not technical. Let's take a listen.
A good compromise is everyone leaves a little bit unhappy, right? But I think what's going to happen is that after market structure passes, the banks are going to get fully into the crypto industry. So we're not going to have a separate banking industry and crypto industry. It's going to be one digital assets industry. And I think
And will they be regulated
their opinions are going to evolve over time. And I bet you, over time, the banks like the idea of paying yield because they're going to be in the stablecoin business.
But will they also be regulated the same way? And I guess that's a big, I mean, the banks will say, hey, if they get to do all the same things we do, how come they don't get regulated the same way?
Well, I guess because they're offering slightly different products, right?
Yeah.
So, but I mean, everyone offering the same product should be regulated in the same way, and we want to get to that harmonization.
Now, Sachs' comments come as momentum builds around the Digital Asset Market Clarity Act. This week, the chairman of the CFTC said lawmakers are on the cusp of passing the bill. Regulators want digital asset markets to flourish domestically under tailored rules. At the same time, SEC Commissioner Hester Pierce said the Senate is actively working through final details. That suggests negotiations have moved into drafting, not debating, and there have been many delays. Markup was postponed after industry groups, including Coinbase, raised concerns about unintended consequences. Lawmakers chose refinement over speed. Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong said progress remains strong. He described the pause as alignment, not a setback. And for Bitcoin, this distinction matters. Market structure rules do not change Bitcoin. They change who is allowed to interact with it at scale. Now, once banks are cleared to custody and offer exposure, Bitcoin continues its shift from niche asset to financial infrastructure. For viewers at home, this matters because regulation often determines adoption more than technology does. And the next wave of participation may depend less on innovation and more on permission. We're bringing Nolan back. Nolan, what are your first thoughts about hearing this at Davos? We heard Sachs talk, we heard the Donald talk. What's your first beat on this?
It continues to be consistent with what we've seen from the Trump administration over the first year in this sense. When Trump first convened the Crypto Council, the White House Crypto Council, the first meeting, which was about 2 weeks after his inauguration, so would have been early February, something like that. I covered it on Roxom. It was one of the first things we covered. So it's been going on for a little over a year. Now, what was interesting about the crypto summit, and this dovetails on exactly what David Sachs was saying there, was who wasn't invited. Who wasn't invited were the regulators of the Federal Reserve System. So the FDIC was not there. The Federal Reserve was not invited. It was Bessent, the Treasury, Lutnick. It was all these folks from the executive branch. So this fits in exactly what the CNBC interviewer was asking of David Sachs. Who's going to regulate what regime? And he says we need to harmonize. It looks like what they're trying to do is pull the entire banking industry into the crypto market structure bill, not the other way around. They're not trying to fit the crypto market structure bill into the Federal Reserve System. They're creating an off-ramp that is different from the Federal Reserve System, that exists under the guise of what Bessent is doing, that exists under Bessent's framework, that exists squarely within Treasury, squarely within the administration, not this independent bank cartel that is the Federal Reserve. So it's completely structurally different. So that's what makes it so interesting, because it's not just proposing a few regulations inside of the existing system. It's proposing an entirely new system. And with what we heard from David Sachs there, he's talking about luring the U.S. commercial banks within the Federal Reserve System into the purview of Treasury. So this is all about who's at the center of that economic engine. Again, if you think of World War III in terms of a psychological and economic war, the engine of that psychological movement, of its perpetuation, of it going forward, was the Federal Reserve for a long time. Trump is talking about swapping out that engine for Treasury-based psychological and economic engine with Bitcoin and stable coins at the very heart of it. So there's a lot more going on than what David Sachs just said. It's about harmonizing bills. Not exactly. It's about getting the Federal Reserve System to fit within the market structure, not the other way around. Those people were not invited to the party. They're not involved in any of this stuff, and they're not included in the way it's being architected. So that is what I expect is going to happen, and that's what Trump has been consistent on for the past year. The other part that I heard from Trump that was really important that I want to also reiterate was when Trump was talking about how Bitcoin and crypto is politically interesting for him. One of the things that was different there is the way that Bitcoiners and crypto folks are sort of one issue people, that he was able to sway and break the left wing, right wing mold. The Democrat Republican mold was broken through Bitcoiners and through crypto, where you had a lot of people saying, okay, well, I don't have to agree with everything, but this is where I want to be. And so I would say that the demographic in Bitcoin and crypto was one of the most plastic, let's say. It could move, and not a lot of groups out there, not a lot of cohorts in the election system are actually up for grabs. So him recognizing it was up for grabs, recognizing that it was just sitting, one of the things that Trump does best is when people leave free money on a table, he picks it up. He doesn't say, is that someone else's? Whose is that? Should I take that? He just goes, there's a big pile of cash right there. I'm going to take it. And so that's what he did. Remember, the Bitcoin 2024 event in Nashville produced almost 1/3 of his campaign donations in 2024, almost a third. That's not a little bit. That was a lot. He only raised about 380 million, and he got over 100 from that event. So that's when he said it was very good for him. That was free money. All he had to do was say, fire Gary Gensler and play with your Bitcoins. And he got 100 something million US trash tokens for it. So that was free money. Wow. And he's following along with the commitments he made to get that free money.
Yeah. And another thing that he mentioned in the speech was he talked about how the United States is definitely, China is competing with us for Bitcoin and AI and how we're winning. What do you think the point of that rhetoric was in his speech? Is this part of that kind of world war, psychological war that you're talking about? He's letting the world know, we are competing with China now. He's letting China know, and we're the ones winning the race? Or why even bring that up right now, you think?
Well, one of the things that Bitcoin unlocked has a lot to do with the AI energy finance boom. You heard in that same speech today, he was talking with Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg told him, I have a $500 billion data center as big as the island of Manhattan. He said, what are you talking about? For 50 million, you can build a beautiful shopping mall. For 500 million, you can build the greatest shopping mall you've ever seen. You're talking about 50 billion. And he showed him the picture. And, Trump, who knows about building, said, actually, can you even build that for 50 billion, when he understood the scale? So one of the things that this AI, they have to own their own energy. It's one of the things he's talking about. I think he signed some kind of executive order recently that they have to pay for their own energy, that Microsoft and others are going to have to pay for their own energy. By creating this energy finance system, that's where he has to catch up with China, because China had already state mandated the creation of all these energy systems. They're way ahead of the United States. And so as we turn money into energy, or energy into money, however you want to call it, right? Having energy-based money, not a petrodollar per se, something else than a petrodollar, something more advanced. The reason why the petrodollar ended up disincentivizing energy creation in America was because governments were put in charge of energy licensing and regulation. They said, nuclear is complicated. That's why we haven't built anything in 40 years, because the finance model went through the state. The state said, gas and oil works well enough for now. You get into the innovator's dilemma framework, right? If things are working, do we really need to innovate? China can innovate because they're top-down structured. They say go build it, and they got it right? They were right. Build all the energy you need. So it's, while they play around with the CBDCs and social credit in China, I don't think that's what Trump was talking about competing. He was talking about the energy, and they had created this mousetrap to create a ton of energy. And so that will be what dominates the world. And, if you get into the architecture of AI, right away you understand it uses tokens. Right away you start to see the crypto flows of how you would want it to work, right? You want it to be like Bitcoin, a push transaction. You want to just just like an arcade game, give it the coin and it does the thing. You don't want to have to go and pull the money out of your account by sharing your mother's maiden name and your dog's name and everything else that goes into security certificates and all the infrastructure that goes into cyber security. You don't want any of that. You want it to be a push transaction. So you can see the harmony right away between crypto and AI. Bitcoin created probably a 10-year head start on how to finance data centers because we had already figured this out, how to co-locate, how to load balance, how to exist within the parameters of a normal data center, the integrated chips, the type of chips that we use with ASICs that are specific to one job. All of that AI learned from Bitcoin. And even now, when you think of these Bitcoin, these AI data centers, there's going to be a Bitcoin mine in probably each of them. So Trump going out there talking about it in terms of energy, saying, okay, we've got to find a way to beat China. What he's really talking about is currency and energy. He's got to find a way to unleash American innovation in the energy sector. It can't come from the government. We can't copy the Chinese system. It's already too late for that. We got to find innovators. We got to find a way in between to create all of this energy, to create all these energy systems. And to me, that's what he's saying when you got to compete against China. That's what he's really getting at. And that's why he's unleashed this whole structure.
Which
is what he told us
in
the Nashville thing, right? You're going to say, Mr. President, too much energy. It's too much. That's what he's getting.
That's funny. All right, we're taking a quick break here, Nolan, but when we're back, gang, we're going to be talking about the UN that's come out to warn that the world has entered global water bankruptcy. We're going to fill you in on what that means and more when we're back here on RoxomTV News.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Fuck. Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Welcome back to RoxomTV News. From river basins stretching across North America, Australia, Africa, and Asia, a new warning from the United Nations is landing with unusual urgency. The United Nations says the world has entered what it calls an era of global water bankruptcy, meaning humanity is using water faster than nature can replace it. According to the report, rivers, soils, aquifers, and wetlands are being overextracted, overpolluted beyond recovery in many regions. Climate change is accelerating the damage through glacier loss, extreme droughts, and increasingly erratic flooding. The UN estimates roughly 75% of the global population now lives in countries that are water insecure or critically water insecure. 2 billion people live in regions where the ground is physically sinking because groundwater reserves are collapsing beneath them. Major river systems like the Colorado River in the United States and Australia's Murray-Darling are no longer reliably reaching the ocean. So-called day zero water emergencies, where cities effectively run out of water, are becoming more frequent in places like Chennai, Cape Town, and Tehran. Now, the report's lead author warned that many water systems are already past the point of restoration. Now, no one knows when the cascading failures could begin triggering food shortages, displacement, or conflict, and more than half of the world's food is grown in regions where water storage is declining. Now, that raises risks not only for food prices, but for global trade and political stability. The UN also notes that water-related conflicts have surged sharply since 2010. Managing water scarcity fairly, the report says, is now central to preventing social breakdown. For people watching at home, this matters because water scarcity is no longer a future problem or a distant one. It is already reshaping food costs, migration pressures, and geopolitical stability, even in countries that once assumed water would always be there. We're bringing Nolan back. Nolan, the UN is using some unusually blunt language here, saying the world has entered an era of global water bankruptcy. For people hearing that phrase for the first time, what does that mean and what is your beat on this? Are you concerned?
I declare bankruptcy.
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing. First of all, the idea that humans can measure the amount of water in the world is insane. Like, what do you got someone out there weighing the rivers? Come on.
Yeah.
I mean, we can barely get a head count at a soccer game when we sell tickets. We can't measure the water on Earth. Now, definitely the places listed are real. There's absolute problems. They're local. And here's the solution. Everything that I just said about private exploration of energy of these small modular nuclear reactors, as we move into the golden age, you hear Trump always using those memes, we're entering the golden age. The golden age will be the golden age because of the amount of energy we have. Once we figure out the energy piece, once we figure out how to have this kind of unlimited energy, you're going to see so much water. You're going to see things like the following, right? The state of Arizona had made this deal a long time ago with the state of California that most of that water that's coming to Arizona, I'm not sure if it's the Colorado River, but one of the main rivers that brings water to a very dry part of the world, Arizona, naturally dry. It's always been that way as far as we can tell. Now, the Californians will take it. Now, this was politically understood. It's why they call the Arizona senators the third senators for California, because they haven't really been working in their own best interests apparently, but I'm not concerned about the Arizona California thing, because you can actually desalinate water using very simple membranes and gravity. You could pump the water from the Pacific Ocean over the Sierra Madres, the ocean water, and it will flow down the backside of those mountains as fresh water coming into the desert. Bitcoin citadels and the idea of breakaway cities. Now, Trump, one of the coolest things that he talked about in his campaign, he hasn't followed through, but I do expect it to be news in the 250th anniversary celebrations of the United States. It's this idea of a Freedom City contest, that we're going to build 10 new cities in the desert. He said in the desert, on federal lands out west in the desert. We're going to build 10 new cities. And there would be a competition, and we'd see which ones get financed. I believe Mark Wahlberg is going to get his city in Las Vegas. It's one of the first that will be in the 10. It's the Hollywood competitor. You're going to see it built right in Nevada, right on the border with California, to compete against the rules. You know, I guess you can't smoke in a movie, and that's like a California rule. Right. So all these little things they want to get around by having Vegas become the new Hollywood. So this idea of terraformation, of manipulating uninhabitable land to be habitable, is going to be the defining characteristic of this century. It's needed if we're ever going to go to a place like Mars or the moon. We got to figure out how to make cities in the Arctic. We got to make cities in the desert. You know, even when we worry about hurricanes in America, the truth about the hurricane problem in America is it comes from the Sahara Desert. It comes from the hot air coming off the Sahara Desert, hitting the ocean, going down on the backside of the Gulf Current, being sucked into the Caribbean, and then being recharged and shot up towards the continent. If you make the Sahara Desert a little cooler, if you actually plant trees in Western Sahara, in Morocco, in all of these places on that part of Africa on the Atlantic Ocean, Mauritania, then what you're going to get is an end of North American hurricanes. It's going to be no problem at all to go over to Western Sahara, which isn't even a country. You don't even to ask permission to go there. Nobody owns it. It's not like Greenland. No one claimed it. It's one of the few parts of the world that no one has claimed. So the United States can actually send like a bunch of innovators after we build our freedom cities in America to go and green the Sahara Desert. And we're going to stop hurricanes and save a lot of money. So we're going to have so much water.
Yeah.
We're going to be living in a golden age. We're going to use all of these energy systems that are being built from AI and not from the intelligence of AI, literally just from the financial model of energy consumption and energy finance, using all this stuff to actually build a whole new water infrastructure that is going to fix everyone's water problems. It's going to go to Iran. It's going to go to Africa. It's going to go everywhere it's needed. It's going to start in Arizona. And I believe it's going to start in Arizona. You're going to hear tale of it by the midterms this year, because that was what the whole midterm election in Arizona ran on in 2022, was the water issue. It's what brought Blake Masters, a Bitcoiner, to within inches of winning the Senate seat in Arizona. You're going to see more Bitcoiner types like that will be talking about this, that will have these solutions. So Arizona is going to get a Bitcoin citadel. The Bitcoin citadel is going to purify water from the Pacific Ocean, and the UN is going to sound like reruns of Steve Carroll on The Office declaring publicly, water bankruptcy is not going to work. It doesn't work.
Well, I got to say, your optimism on this, Nolan, really saved me. I was starting to feel like I needed to reach for my cantina, but it sounds like energy will solve this. So I'm excited for that
and
future.
Bitcoin.
I didn't realize we were taking a page out. Yeah, and Bitcoin, of course, that'll save the monetary system. I didn't realize Dubai had such an impact on us. Now we just want to start building our own desert cities. I'm here for it, though. The energy.
Oh, yeah, no,
cooperates.
so I was saying that last year in Dubai, that one of the big partnerships coming up is America learning from the Saudis and the Emiratis about how to build a city in the desert. It's why they're some of our most important allies. And indeed, they're going to help us build those cities in the desert. And it's one of the foundations of this Bitcoin connection you see from that part of the world.
All right, well, I'm excited for it. I'm here for the future cities, and I'm always excited when you come and join us on the show, Nolan. So as always, thank you so much for dropping in. We love having you. Excited to see you tomorrow, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, my friend.
Peace, man. Thanks for having me. We love it. Let's get the sci-fi future golden age rolling.
I can't wait. I'm here for it. All right, we're taking a break here at RoxomTV News. When we're back, we're going to be moving into the second hour of today's show, where we'll be joined by our second special guest of the day. So stay tuned. More RoxomTV News coming your way right after this quick break.
In a world far away. Nah, just kidding. This story begins in this world. It all started in 1460 in Antwerp, when the first commodities exchange was created, but the real transformation came in 1602, when the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was founded. Considered the oldest in the world, it was the first to trade financial assets. Over the years, Britain expanded its colonial and maritime influence, and the British pound sterling overtook the Dutch guilder in the market. Thus, the London Stock Exchange became the financial centre of the world. The 20th century came, and the world got into some trouble. But shortly after World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, and the centre of the planet moved to Wall Street. Today, we're travelling at the speed of light towards a new age, an era shaped by the consolidation of Bitcoin as the currency that will define the future of the markets. We present Roxom, a new Bitcoin-denominated market that allows trading all sorts of securities, commodities, derivatives, options, and anything you can imagine. Roxom, rock-solid markets.
Welcome back to RoxomTV News. As we move into the second hour of today's show, here's a quick recap of the top story we covered during the first hour of today's program. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, President Donald Trump put two very different issues on the global agenda. On Greenland, he doubled down on claims that Denmark is too weak to secure the island, warned of tariffs against European countries that resist U.S. efforts to acquire it, and framed control of Greenland as a strategic necessity, sparking sharp backlash from Europe. At the same time, Trump signaled a more market-friendly posture by telling global leaders he hopes to sign a major crypto market structure bill soon, pledging to make the United States the world's crypto capital and paving the way for banks to enter digital asset markets once regulations are finalized. Now to the top story of this hour. Guys, let's roll a stinger. All right, the top story of our second hour of today's program brings us to Minneapolis and across the wider Twin Cities region, as local law enforcement effort has turned into a national flashpoint over immigration, federal power, and civil liberties. What began as a series of targeted arrests has expanded into a sprawling confrontation involving federal immigration agents, state and city leaders, the courts, hospitals, churches, and thousands of protesters in the streets. At the center of the escalation is a major federal deployment that has brought thousands of immigration and custom enforcement agents and Border Patrol officers into residential neighborhoods across Minnesota. Agents have carried out arrests in the streets, parking lots, and private homes, often wearing tactical gear. The visibility of the operations has drawn residents into the streets themselves, many filming encounters on their phones, questioning agents, and in some cases attempting to intervene. The scale of the enforcement effort is unprecedented in Minnesota and has fueled daily demonstrations across Minneapolis, St. Paul, and surrounding suburbs. Federal officials defend the crackdown as lawful and necessary, arguing that agents are executing court-ordered deportations and operating within their authority. The U.S. Border Patrol says the operations are meant to enforce immigration law and ensure officer safety in the field. Let's take a look at how federal officials are describing their actions.
Our operations are lawful, they're targeted, and they're focused on individuals who pose a serious threat to this community. They are not random, and they are not political. They are about removing criminals who are actively harming Minneapolis neighborhoods.
ICE currently has more than 1,360 immigration detainers on illegal aliens in Minnesota jails and prisons, and we are calling on Governor Walz and Mayor Frey to turn these criminal illegal aliens directly over to ICE to keep Minnesota residents in our community safe.
As the enforcement effort expanded, so did the legal stakes. This week, the U.S. Justice Department issued subpoenas to the offices of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Attorney General Keith Ellison, and the mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul. The subpoenas are part of a criminal grand jury investigation examining whether local officials unlawfully obstructed federal immigration enforcement. Federal prosecutors are seeking documents related to cooperation with ICE, marking a rare and aggressive move against state and city leadership. Minnesota officials have condemned the subpoenas as politically motivated intimidation. Federal authorities say the investigation is about enforcing the law and protecting federal officers from interference. Democratic leaders in the state argue the probe criminalizes political disagreement and threatens long-standing principles of federalism. At the same time, the confrontation has moved into the courts. Civil rights groups and residents have filed multiple lawsuits alleging unconstitutional searches, excessive force, and racial profiling during ICE operations. In response, a federal judge issued a temporary injunction limiting agents' ability to detain or use crowd-control munitions against peaceful protesters and bystanders. The ruling underscores the judiciary's growing role in shaping how immigration enforcement unfolds on the ground. Now, as legal pressure mounted, protests grew larger and more intense. Thousands of demonstrators have marched through Minneapolis and St. Paul, framing the crackdown as an aggressive federal overreach that they say destabilizes communities rather than improving public safety. Even President Donald Trump has acknowledged that enforcement operations are not error-free. Here's what he said about ICE making mistakes.
You're going to make a mistake. Sometimes it can happen. We feel terribly. I felt horribly when I was told that the young woman who was had the tragedy. It's a tragedy. It's a horrible thing. Everybody would say, ICE would say the same thing. But when I learned her parents and her father in particular I hope he still is, but I don't know, was a tremendous Trump fan. He was all for Trump, loved Trump. And it's terrible. I was told that by a lot of people. They said, "Oh, he loves you. He was a." I hope he still feels that way. I don't know. It's a hard situation. But her father was a tremendous, and parents were tremendous Trump fans. It's so sad. It just happens. It's terrible.
Now, the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees ICE, says agents have faced assaults, interference, and dangerous conditions during operations. Officials argue strong enforcement is necessary to carry out deportation orders and protect officers in volatile situations. What has emerged is a widening confrontation that now extends far beyond immigration policy alone. Minnesota has become a testing ground for how far the federal government can go in pressuring local officials to cooperate. It is also testing how courts balance civil liberties against enforcement priorities, and how political disagreement is handled when it spills into criminal investigations and mass protests. For now, there is no clear off-ramp here, and with subpoenas issued, lawsuits advancing, protests continuing, and federal officials signaling continued pressure, Minnesota's ICE controversy is no longer just a local dispute. It is shaping a national debate over federal power, the rule of law, and the future of immigration enforcement in the United States. And the escalating ICE crackdown is now reshaping the national political landscape ahead of November's midterm elections. For Republicans, immigration enforcement has long been a political strength, particularly with voters concerned about border security and crime. But the visibility of masked agents, armed operations in neighborhoods, and confrontations with bystanders risks alienating suburban voters, independents, and local business owners affected by ongoing unrest. Some Republican lawmakers have privately warned that public discomfort with enforcement tactics could blunt traditional law and order messaging, especially in competitive districts. Democrats, well, they face their own dilemma. Party leaders broadly condemn what they describe as aggressive and destabilizing enforcement, but are wary of being portrayed as opposing immigration enforcement entirely. Strategists told AP that Minnesota highlights a deeper tension within the party between progressive activists and centrist lawmakers over how far to push the opposition. Analysts cited by Reuters say sustained controversy could influence control of Congress, and Democrats could gain ground if backlash grows, but risk losses if immigration becomes framed as disorder rather than accountability. Now, the enforcement surge is also spilling into Minnesota's healthcare system, as doctors and hospitals report sharp declines in clinic visits from immigrant communities. Pregnant women are missing prenatal care. Cancer patients are losing access to medication while in detention. Diabetics are avoiding pharmacies because of ICE activity nearby. At Hennepin County Medical Center, the state's busiest emergency room, staff say they have moved internal communications to encrypted channels after repeated encounters with plainclothes ICE officers. Doctors told the AP they have seen officers questioning patients and employees as they leave the hospital. Some hospital workers have stayed home out of fear, worsening staffing shortages. And healthcare leaders say conditions worsened after the administration ended a long-standing policy limiting immigration enforcement at hospitals, schools, and churches. Federal officials deny interfering with medical care, but doctors say perception alone is enough to keep patients away. And medical associations warn this chilling effect could turn hospitals from places of refuge into places of fear with long-term public health consequences. Now, the crackdown has also drawn concern from religious leaders. Archbishop Timothy Broglio, head of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, said it could be morally acceptable for troops to disobey orders that violate their consciences. Now, he did not cite specific directives, but warned that service members could increasingly face morally questionable situations as domestic employments expand. His remarks came as President Trump has threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act in Minnesota. Legal experts note that service members must refuse unlawful orders, but determining where legality ends and moral judgment begins can place individuals in precarious positions. Now, the episode highlights how the Minnesota standoff is now touching institutions far removed from immigration policy itself. Now, I want to give you my beat on this because here's what I think is actually happening here, stripped of the politics, okay? The federal government decided to dramatically increase the visibility and intensity of immigration enforcement. And Minnesota is where that decision collided head-on with real communities, real institutions, and real limits. You can believe enforcing immigration law and still question whether sending tactical teams into neighborhoods, outside hospitals, and near schools is the smartest way to do it. You can support ICE and admit that when enforcement becomes chaotic on camera, it stops looking like law enforcement and starts looking like escalation. Now, on the flip side, local leaders don't get to pretend federal law doesn't exist just because it's unpopular. When cities openly resist enforcement, Washington is going to respond, and subpoenas are the bluntest tool in that toolbox. Now, what makes Minnesota different is that everything is happening all at once. The arrests, the protests, the lawsuits, the subpoenas, the hospitals, the churches, when all of that stacks up on top of each other, enforcement stops being about deportation orders and starts being about who actually controls the situation. You see, this is no longer a debate about border policy. It's a debate about how enforcement looks, where it happens, and how far it's allowed to go before it starts creating new problems instead of solving old ones. And whether people like it or not, the images coming out of Minnesota are going to matter just as much as the laws behind them. All right, we're taking a break here at RoxomTV News, but when we're back, we're going to be joined by our second guest of the day to break down more of today's top stories. So stay tuned. We'll be back right after this quick break.
Security matters. Zappo Bank, the only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Before we get into our Bitcoin story of the hour, I'd like to welcome our special guest, Michael Tanguma. He's the co-founder and CEO of OnRamp Bitcoin, and he's going to be chatting with us about these stories. So Michael, welcome back to the show. How are you? Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us.
Excited to chat. I think good timing given the folks in Davos and all the news happening in the space and just in general in the markets.
Absolutely. And I want to start with that, Michael. So I want to start with your take on our biggest Bitcoin story of the day. Let me give a quick recap first, and then you and I will get into it. Sound good?
Let's do it.
All right. So to recap, President Donald Trump says he hopes to sign a crypto bill soon. While speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Trump said he wants to ensure America remains the crypto capital of the world, adding that Congress is working really hard on crypto market structure legislation, Bitcoin, all of them. Here's more on what he had to say. Let's take a quick peek.
To unleash innovation in savings and financing, I'm also working to ensure America remains the crypto capital of the world. And to that end, last year, I signed the landmark Genius Act into law. Now Congress is working very hard on crypto market structure legislation, Bitcoin, all of them, which I hope to sign very soon, unlocking new pathways for Americans to reach financial freedom. And I did it for two reasons. Number one, I thought it was politically good, and it was. I got tremendous political support. But more importantly, China wanted that market too. It's just like they want the AI. And we've got that market, I think, pretty well locked up. If I didn't do it, Biden was totally against it until before the election when they realized that, there were millions of people voting against him over crypto. And all of a sudden they loved it very much, but it was too late. They blew it. But it is politically popular, but it's much more importantly, we have to make it so that China doesn't get the hold of it. And once they have that hold, we're not going to be able to get it back.
All right, so Michael, we saw Trump come out, speak at Davos. Let me ask you, does this change anything for you, or is this just lip service? What are your initial thoughts on Trump coming out with these words at Davos today?
Well, I got lucky because this is the lob of the day. I think this is super bullish and super positive. I think personally, we were chatting about it on our podcast early in the week about the powers that be want this bill passed for a number of reasons, whether it's the bank stepping in, sovereign bid for U.S. Treasury, so stable coins, obviously what Trump talked about with China and other sovereigns stepping in. You want to have a favorable political climate. And to me, this consolidation is kind of really waiting for that. I think the thing that a lot of individuals forget is that institutions want clarity, whether it's capital markets, if you're going to go public in this space, whether it's investing in private companies, and also when it's banks. When you have this enacted into law, it changes the dynamic on a risk profile. The other aspect of this, it came out a couple of days ago, the Block posted that Trump's family wealth has increased, at least on the digital asset side, crypto side, by 1.3 or 1.5 billion dollars. And so I think that's a big piece that's missed in this space is the Trump family has placed their bets on where they believe it's going. The reality is this stuff takes time. We saw that with, Ross Pardon and some of the other things, the strategic reserve announcement. But I think this is a very positive catalyst. And I would expect, I had a tweet earlier that within 3 months, we see Bitcoin all-time highs once this bill is put into law, signed.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would be some very bullish news. And as you said, you mentioned these things can take time. And the strategic Bitcoin reserve is what ultimately comes right to my mind when I think about that. Why do you think it's been taking so much time? Trump announced early in his new term last year that there was going to be a lot more crypto regulation and clarity coming forward, but we're a year in and we're still kind of talking about it rather than seeing it the way I think a lot of us expected. Why does this take so long? Is it because they need to make sure they get it right the first time because the world's kind of watching on what the United States does? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really the worst person to talk to when it comes to like legislation and what goes on in the bureaucracy of a government, whether it's the US or external. With that said, I think we have to remember the market cap and size of BTC, specifically relevant to gold. And so gold should be this canary in the coal mine. Looking at it just in the past, I think 48 hours, it's added close to like at least 1 to 2 Bitcoin market caps. We're sitting at like $4,800 a troy ounce. It's a $33 trillion market cap asset. And that is the bid of, it's this notion that people are sovereigns really, because that's really who's buying gold. Very few people we would know. Anybody listening knows people that are accumulating spot gold and physical. But sovereigns are saying that they no longer want treasuries. The money's fundamentally broken. And we saw this come out late last year, or it was late 24 when a lot of the gold was coming back onshore into the United States. That's very bullish for Bitcoin because gold is Bitcoin, or Bitcoin is gold with wings. It just has better properties. A lot of folks listening here know that, but the rest of the world doesn't know that. They're still worried about quantum, which is a complete, different topic, but they're still getting shaken out of their position because they're concerned about a boogeyman called quantum. Point being is that there's an order of operations from this administration when you think about the money changing, the bid necessary, interest rates, and stable coins, that I just believe that this is the natural order, including what you would want in financial markets, but also from a regulatory perspective. You've also seen this heavily with whether it's Google, banks. I think this past week it was Morgan Stanley, State Street, London Stock Exchange, and New York Stock Exchange all announced that they're launching tokenized deposits, tokenized securities. Like they're already moving where they know the market's headed. And so you just have this order in progression because you still have a small market relative to all the other things that the administration is working on. When you think about AI, energy, the craziness that's going on right now from the ICE stuff. I mean, there's just no shortage of things on their to-do list, and this falls within it. And I think there's a natural, just sequential order they're following.
Yeah. And, recently we've seen a real flight to those safe haven assets. You mentioned gold, silver, copper. Yeah, Bitcoin right now lagging behind. I believe it's dropped below 90K in the last 24 hours or so. What's going on there? We were expecting price predictions, in the 150 plus for the end of last year. But here we are, sub 90. Is this really just a matter of waiting for real clarity from the government and then we'll start seeing maybe new all-time highs like you mentioned? Is it as simple as that, or is there maybe something else beneath the surface here?
Yeah, it reminds me of the notion of easy choices, hard life, hard choices, easy life. Most individuals at what you're describing think they would rather see Bitcoin at 150 right now and gold sit at 15 trillion, 20 trillion and not make its move. It's not true. You rather see what's happening today, gold being repriced on a world stage, the market saying they want sound, hard money for a number of geopolitical reasons, and then see Bitcoin lag And then ultimately you'll see it catch up with a vengeance because we've already seen these large assets. It's crazy the size of silver's market. I think it's like 5 to 6 billion, billion, or trillion, I'm sorry. And then gold at 33 to add trillions of dollars in market cap overnight. And those are much larger assets. When we look at Bitcoin's free float, 21 million, the reality, though, is Bitcoin is still a risk-on asset. Now, maybe not for a lot of the listeners here and a lot of people that have been looking at Bitcoin for a very long time, but its properties are still foreign. How you custody it's still foreign. And so when people think about risk on, they look at Bitcoin. And so right now you see gold, you see silver. And there's also a lot easier trade when you think about commodities and inflation because you're looking at, something that's finite production. The funny part, most people don't even know there's only 21 million. Like full stop. Right. If you ask somebody on the street how many Bitcoin exists, or you said there was a fixed supply, they would be shocked to hear 21 million. And that generally it invokes some interest because you're like, what do you mean there's only 21 million? How can you enforce that? And that puts people down. So we're still so early to this game. But I honestly think it's insanely bullish that the market is basically repricing sound assets relative to fiat monies. And it's just a matter of time before Bitcoin catches up to that.
Well, I think that's music to Bitcoiners' ears around the world, and a bullish take is always a great time for us to take a quick break here at RoxomTV News. But when we're back, Michael and I are going to be talking about Wall Street, who suffered a sharp drop yesterday. We're going to tell you why. And there's more legal trouble on the way for Kalshi and the prediction market space. So stay tuned. More RoxomTV News coming your way right after this quick break.
Yep.
Are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am. And the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any credit card. You can buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of other 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee, and right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Our next story is taking place in New York, where markets reopened this week to a sharp dose of reality after a long holiday weekend. U.S. stocks posted their steepest one-day drop in months as investors reacted to renewed tariff threats tied to President Trump's Greenland push. The Dow fell nearly 1.8%. The S&P 500 slid just over 2%. The Nasdaq dropped more than 2.3% itself, and both the S&P 5 and the Nasdaq closed below their 50-day moving averages for the first time since October. Now, the sell-off followed Trump's warning that the U.S. could impose new tariffs on European countries unless they agree to a deal allowing the U.S. to control Greenland. Now, those tariffs would begin at 10% on February 1st and rise to 25% by June. Investors immediately priced in renewed trade war risk, and the VIX volatility index jumped above 20, its highest level in months. Trading volume surged well above recent averages, and risk-off mood spread quickly beyond stocks. Gold climbed to fresh record highs. U.S. Treasury yields rose as longer-dated bonds were sold. Bitcoin fell more than 3%, failing to act as a hedge during the sell-off. Global pressure increased after turmoil in Japan, where rising bond yields and political uncertainty rattled Asian markets, and some analysts cautioned against assuming this marks the start of a full correction. Others warn the Greenland dispute could be a test case for how aggressively trade policy will be used going forward. Now, for viewers at home, this matters because markets are not reacting to Greenland itself. They are reacting to uncertainty, and uncertainty has a habit of spreading faster than tariffs ever do. We're bringing Michael back. Michael, markets took a real hit after the holiday season, and Greenland, of all things, was part of the trigger. Why are investors reacting so strongly to rhetoric rather than actual tariffs being imposed? You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is Groundhog's Day, right? If we go back to the same time last year, we had Trump. I don't even remember how many times. There's at least 2 to 3 large incidents where Trump, off the cuff, was tweeting about tariffs and markets took a nosedive. I think the reality, and Pomp's really coined this, is like most investors forget that just market can only go up over a long enough time. We can see some, corrections on a week or month time frame, but the reality is just the debt levels. You need the stock market to continue to go up and hit all-time highs, and we've seen that over the course of 2025 as the price tanked, whether it was tariffs or any kind of rhetoric from the White House or Trump specifically. You saw the market come back. And the thing that I do think is relevant here is just geopolitical risk and uncertainty around having capital in the United States. I think that's a big component of the reluctance around treasury demand. And then also there's this notion of what sovereigns or countries do we want to be parking their capital in the US? And that's really where else do you go? What asset has a liquidity profile like bonds? The only other asset of that size is gold. And so that's really where you see that bid as well come from.
Mm-hmm. And analysts, seem a little split in terms of some are saying that this could just be a simple one-day shock, while others think this might actually be the start of something potentially bigger. What signals should viewers be watching at home to kind of know or get an inkling of which way this is going to go? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think the notion of the stock market is the barometer almost of this financial economy. And I forget who was talking about it. But it was the reference point around like it was Bill Gurley recently talking about China and how they value the actual like economic production of their country versus they don't ever want a company to become too great or too big, and it rivals the thought of the Magnificent Seven in the amount of value. Like, do we benefit from having these large companies sit at these large valuations? The reality is they need to sustain the levels of debt loads, tax receipts, and all the things associated. So point being, I think that if we see any correction in any like real marginal amount, you'll naturally see them walk it back. You saw this with Trump again last year when I think Bessent had to come back and like quell the markets and comment, say, hey, it's not as severe, the tariffs, we're going to figure this out. We figured it out with China. Mm-hmm. So I fully expect if you see any real substantial downturn or effectively deleveraging, you'll see that. And then also on the bond side, I think that also happened early last year where bonds were spiking because of all the different rhetoric that was happening, and they had to also come in. I think the net of all this means that if there is any, not permanent, but on a short time frame downturn, you ultimately see the market have to inject some liquidity in some form or fashion. I think it came out like last month, the amount of mortgages that the U.S. government was buying, which is ultimately all bullish long-term, the thesis of sound hard assets, because it's just pretty simple math. It's infinite amount of dollars that have to be created to sustain the debt. And then you have a finite supply, whether it's Bitcoin with 21 million or whatever gold's increase in on an annual basis that's being chased by those infinite number of dollars, hence the number go up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well put. I appreciate you giving us that full-fledged breakdown. I got nothing to add on that one. I think you did a pretty good job summarizing it. So we're going to move on to our next story, Michael, because in a Boston courtroom, a growing prediction markets industry just hit a regulatory wall. A Massachusetts judge has issued a preliminary injunction blocking Kalshi from offering sports-related contracts to residents of the state. The ruling came after a lawsuit filed by the state's attorney general, who argued Kalshi was offering illegal unlicensed sports betting. The judge agreed, saying Kalshi cannot offer sports contracts without obtaining a gaming license. Now, in the court's view, those contracts function more like traditional gambling than financial derivatives, and the injunction applies only to sports markets. Kalshi can continue offering contracts tied to politics, economics, and other non-sporting events, and the company declined to comment on the ruling. Now, the case highlights growing pressure on prediction markets, which sit in kind of a gray area between federal derivatives regulation and state gambling laws. Kalshi previously won a major legal battle against the Commodity Futures Trading Commission over election-related contracts. This case shows that state authorities are now asserting their own power, especially where sports betting is involved. Lawmakers have also raised concerns after large, controversial wagers tied to geopolitics drew public attention. Now, if other states follow Massachusetts' lead, prediction platforms could face a fragmented national market. That would force companies to navigate a patchwork of state gaming laws alongside federal oversight. For people watching at home, this matters because the rules of this market are still being written in real time, and how regulators draw the line here could shape whether prediction markets become mainstream financial tools or stay legally boxed in. So I want to bring in Michael back for this. Michael, what are your initial thoughts on this? Are you a wisdom of the crowd kind of guy? Like, what are your thoughts on Polymarket, Kalshi, and these other prediction markets in this most recent ruling for Kalshi?
I mean, I think the overarching theme is really fascinating in the notion of states asserting kind of their sovereignty from a regulatory political perspective, and then from a federal level. There's precedent for this just recently, right? When you look at, I think it was states and like the internet usage, specifically around pornography and having to be 18 or years of older, around like the KYC effectively. We've seen this in the weed industry with certain states allowing it. Gambling's another example. I'm actually surprised this hasn't come up, already, because if you think about it from a very simple perspective, like, Vegas was built by the mob, and the mob wants their monopoly on money. And so when you kind of bypass a lot of the monopoly or the garden, the walled garden that exists for sports betting in the US by calling them, different things that aren't sports betting, well, there's a lot of lobbyists, there's a lot of powerful people that would want to see that taken away, right? We saw how long it took for DraftKings and FanDuel and these other applications to be live in these markets. And so it makes complete sense that not only like a state, not in particular Massachusetts, but any state would come out, because if they have any kind of, whether it's for the constituents and citizen to not be gambling in what they're called, or it's because they're lobbied by other factions that don't want it to be utilized. So I do expect it to see more of it. I think, again, this ties into also what we're seeing with like California and the Exodus, and even New York, but mainly California, because that's been the topic the past couple of weeks when it comes to the wealth tax and what does that look like. We're just going to get a very fragmented country when it comes to individuals that want a little bit more autonomy when it comes to what they can do and can't do versus others. To your direct question on the derivatives and the like poly markets of the world, I think it's just an interesting thing we're gonna have to figure out. Is it a net value add to the world? Because there's a notion of, okay, we can open up information and more people can speculate, and we can maybe come out with outcomes that could be a positive for society. The other side of that is you effectively are incentivizing for quote unquote whistleblowers or inside knowledge to be leaked, because once you put a financial outcome on that internally, it's the advantage to somebody sitting inside there to be able to leak that or bet on it. So I think we're just going to have a very interesting societal, not at the level of AI and what does it mean for UBI and productivity and all of that, but it's going to be a similar kind of philosophical conversation of like, is it a net positive for society to open up prediction markets and make it ubiquitous across all different sectors of the economy, one being sports betting, another one being political outcomes?
Yeah, it's a really sticky situation, because like I do believe there is something to be said for like the wisdom of the crowd, but as you mentioned, this is just ripe for like insider trading and insider information. I mean, I was talking to Nolan Bowerly on our show, I think it was last week, about it. Like, I had a friend who notified me there was a guy who has a perfect record on like Polymarket predicting outcomes, and he's only been registered for a month, placed like a $400,000 bet, I think it was, that Israel would invade Iran by like January 31st or something. So you're beginning to wonder, like, what do people know that we don't? And also, like, I almost wonder if, could other countries take that intelligence maybe as fact and then use that for their own benefit? Like, it's a real slippery slope, and let's be real, it's absolutely sports gambling. And then if you're able to do it for like collegiate kids, that's a lot of pressure on an 18-year-old who now has millions of dollars that are being transacted maybe based on a free throw or something. So yeah, you're totally right. They kind of need to figure out what the net positive is, if there even is one on this, going forward. And this particular ruling cuts right to the heart of those prediction markets. So my question for you, Michael, is, in your view, where should the line be drawn between financial contracts and gambling, and who ultimately should get to be the one deciding that?
It's a great question. I mean, to be honest, a lot of these things, I think in the short term, it's a very relevant question on who governs it. I think in the long term, it gets nullified because the technology will exist. So the example is like, stable coins is, we talk about right now, the Clarity Act is, will it pass? And then who gets to generate or offset the yield? And the banks are upset with because they like, holding on to those assets and the net interest margin, and they make about $300 billion a year. Point being is the rails exist now, so you can just move offshore and offer it. So like these prediction markets have existed. There's other forms of it. There's a reason, whether it's the tech or regulatory, that it's been in vogue. So now it exists. They'll put constraints, to your point, whether it's federal, state level. But at the end of the day, when you have a borderless form of money, you can never stop the prediction market because somebody will always spin one up. You can say, okay, well, then we can deplatform them from a bank to be able to settle that contract. But Bitcoin is borderless. Bitcoin has properties to allow you to participate in this. So I see this long term as people go on the long tail of more controversial speculation, right? Assassination attempts, different crazy things like that. The reality is like it's out of the box. It exists now. And so I think it's almost like a fool's errand that they will attempt to govern it. You can make the case that it's good to govern it because we shouldn't have the world speculating on everything. I think the reality is this ties back to just a societal situation where everyone's looking for a home run because the money's broken. And so everyone ends up having to think about gambling and try to kind of get out of that. And the only way to get out of it is not by, making more dollars to save, because savings kind of gone by the wayside, inflation, whether it's buying a home or the cost of living. So this is what's forced people there. I think that's like a more, I don't want to say productive, but I think it's a relevant conversation to have where everyone's just talking about how we're going to govern this. In reality, if people felt like they could save their money, they wouldn't be speculating because the house generally always wins in these situations. And it's the same thing as kind of like lotto tickets.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I kind of feel like the tipping point was like Robinhood, and it was this gamification of the financial markets. And now like these poly markets and these prediction markets isn't that much of a far cry from that. You can literally bet on anything. And I think you're right. People are so desperate for a way out of the rat race and the financial hole that so many Americans are feeling in right now. They're kind of willing to take any chances because like at this point, the stock market might not even be that much better of a bet. That's kind of gambling in and of itself too. So you make some really good points, Michael, and I got to say it's always a pleasure when we have you here with us at RoxomTV News. So I really want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your insight and expertise with me and our audiences. Before I let you go though, I'm sure you've undoubtedly got at least a couple new fans out there today. So for those out there that are saying, hey, I want to learn more about Michael and what him and the team at OnRamp are up to, what's the best place I can send them so they can learn more?
Yeah, Hank, I appreciate it. It was great catching up. Always welcome to come back. You can find us at honoratbitcoin.com. The main idea, where it's super relevant here, is we believe Bitcoin's the best savings technology that exists. The problem is it's sometimes harder to harness that technology. So we offer the best savings account in our belief to help people custody, access financial services, whether it's inheritance, dynasty trust. So we have a lot planned for this year. Really excited. We're hiring. So if anybody's interested in joining or looking at what we're doing, just check out honoratbitcoin.com or on Twitter, mtanguma. We have our own podcast. We'd love to have folks on, including yourself, Hank. So whenever it makes sense, we'd love to get you on.
Oh, I would love to do it. That sounds great. I would love to do that, Michael. And thank you always for joining us today. And I think 2026 is going to be a great year for Bitcoin. So I think OnRamp's going to have a banner year as well. And we certainly appreciate every time you're able to join us. So thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday and week. And we'll hope to see you again real soon, my friend.
Awesome. Thanks, Hank.
Cheers. All right, we're taking a quick break here at RoxomTV News, but when we're back, we're going to be joined by our crypto wunderkind, Luca Pagano, to help break down the charts. So stay tuned. More RoxomTV News coming your way after this quick commercial break. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. I'm joined by our resident chart shark, Luca Pagano. Luca, happy Wednesday. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
Hey Hank, how's it going? As always, a pleasure to be here. So thank you for having me.
Pleasure is mine. So, Luca, I got questions for you, my man. In the last 24 hours, we've seen Bitcoin dip about 2%, likely as a result of some of what we heard over in Davos, with a lot of political uncertainty in the world right now, specifically with potential trade wars between the United States and some European countries. But we've also seen Bitcoin dip about 10% in the last week. So what do you think is going on right now? What are the numbers telling you? What do our viewers at home need to be looking for right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, Bitcoin has been having, a couple of tough days in terms of the market. I think mainly, if you look at it as, Hank, I always love to zoom out a little bit. So if you look a little bit of the big picture, it doesn't seem for us to be getting out of the woods yet in terms of, our downtrend starting at mainly at the beginning of October, right? Because if you see where it all happened, in that Black Friday that most of us probably remember, it was quite chaotic. That marked mainly, the essentially the downtrend or the start of the downtrend market shift in terms of Bitcoin and the general crypto market for sure. And for now, what we've seen for me, the end of November probably was sort of a bounce in terms of structure, right? Again, a great level that we marked, I think, last week together here, Hank, was $98,000, which we wanted for us to close a weekly above that because of the market structure, and we honestly we failed to do so, and since then, we've been having quite some rough days, like last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days all red. So it's not been easy in terms of, the market.
No, that's a lot of red candles here. And, Luca, we talked last year. There was a lot of talk about breaking the typical 4-year cycle that we've experienced with Bitcoin. How does that looking right now? If we were to zoom out, because we saw, like you said, that Black Friday dip to around 80K. It was pretty much, I think, probably the most significant single drawback we saw all year. We've gone as high as, I think, like mid-high 90s, but we still haven't gotten back up above those 6 digits. So my question to you is, how is this playing out in relation to past cycles we've seen? Is this par for the course, or are we maybe starting to see some deviation that indicates that this next cycle might be different than the ones previous?
Well, something that's very interesting that we've been talking with Jesse last week as well from Smart Web Companies. It's actually great news what happened last year, breaking the pattern of 3 years green, 1 year red. Because last year was the first one on the Bitcoin cycle side of things. That closed red. And basically broke that pattern. It diverted from last cycle, where you essentially got, as of now, you got 2 green years, now 1 red, and now we'll see, right? This would be the 4th one.
Right.
And so that's definitely very interesting. If you want to be a little bit optimistic on that, it may have been that distribution already occurred, and that what you're seeing right now is essentially institutions absorbing what would be a bear market in other ways, and sort of it should be it, or at least not in time but in price. Of course we shall see that, but what's facts for now and what we gotta be conscious about, Hank, is we already got 36-37% breakdown from all-time highs, right? And now we're standing at sort of a 30-ish. So it's not that we didn't correct it, right? We already corrected a lot, and maybe the market is digesting that. But structure for now, and that's what I was trying to say earlier, for me, like a real break of structure would be closing that weekly above from 95 to 97K. That would be amazing, in terms of freeze.
Yeah. And you mentioned that the fact that last year didn't fulfill the normal expectations we would have expected from the cycle. It was actually, I think, technically a down year based on where Bitcoin started and where the year ended. You said that's a good thing. Can you explain to me why that's a good thing? Because I can understand that it's a good thing that we have institutions scooping up sold Bitcoin, so we have this like new foundation, but it still was technically a down year. So why is that a good thing that we're actually breaking the cycle? Does that signal this next evolution of Bitcoin's journey as a financial asset? Or what are your thoughts on that? I'd be curious.
Well, I mean, you know how this goes. You know, I think a little bit of the market like wants to play its own narrative in terms of there's always a justification of why the 4-year cycle is broken. You know, I've seen it last cycle where we said this is the super cycle because, you know, all the altcoins are much more mature and you have the ETF and this and that, you know, and every cycle I think it's pretty much the same. But to be honest, this is the first cycle where the pattern breaks. If we see the chart, since basically 2009, 2010, you essentially got from 2015 to from 2014 to 2017, you've got essentially the let me share screen here real quick. I thought we were sharing there. Sorry for that, but you've got this 3-year red, 1 year 3-year green, 1 year red type of chart. You know, you've got it here 1, 2, 3 red, 1, 2, 3 red, 1, 2, and now red, not the third green. And for me, like in a more probably actionable way, you know, because that's the most important for me, you know, in an actionable way, essentially what you have is you have a chart that is trying to basically find its ground in absorption of this distribution that you saw here, right? Like, let me divide real quick here, Hank, for you, what I see here as well. There, like, I see that, like, we are trying, this is why for me it's so important, managing the levels. You know, we had range here, we deviated, and then we deviated to the upside. For me, this is distribution, which is what we've seen, you know, last year, remember? Entering particularly October, which broke the structure. Then we went to the downside. And what I don't like, honestly, on this thing, the structure right now, is that you got sort of you know, bear flag here, where you can see, you know, and this is why I love Fibonacci. Let me share you real quick here. 1 sec. This, I want to draw this together, Hank. If we draw the Fibonacci, see that the top is basically the 38%, which is the most common retrace of a confirmed aggressive trend, right? So you've got this downtrend, which is, you know, you gotta see the charts as they are. You don't want to tweak them, where the market sounds aggressive because essentially you're pulling back of the downtrend till those 98 that was marked on the Fibonacci, and you sort of broke this sort of bear flag, right, continuing to the downside. So what would I like to see, Hank, here in terms of having a more bullish news and, you know, not trying to get ahead of myself, you know? For me, it would be amazing for us to recover this broken structure, which would be basically getting above $91,000. For me, is the first key point. If we can do that, then I'd be looking of what we're saying of the 98s again, but that for me is a good long. If not, I would honestly wait for the price to develop, right?
Okay, so 91 is the number we'll be looking at in the short term. Luca, always appreciate you lending your guidance to us with the markets and letting us know what you think is coming to us. And it's always an absolute blast having you on the show, my friend. So thanks so much for stopping by today. It's been great having you.
Thank you, Hank. It's always a pleasure, and hope to see you soon, man.
See you soon, buddy. Cheers. All right,
Bye-bye.
gang. Well, that is a wrap for our Wednesday edition here at Roxom TV News. As always, thanks so much for tuning in with us. And if you haven't already, do the thing. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Roxom TV, Roxom TV News, and me at Hank at Roxom TV, wherever you choose to do your online doom scrolling. We'll be back tomorrow, same 8 a.m. time slot, Pacific time, to bring you more top stories that are happening around the world and explain to you why they matter. So thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you tomorrow for more top stories of world news. Cheers, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.